Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor the President.
Yes, I'm to advise that I've heard from Senators Lynette Holder and Rudolph Greenidge, and they're both absent. You heard?
You don't hear sights. You don't hear sights, sir.
Dr. Lynette Holder and also Senator Rudolph Greenidge, and they're both abroad at this time, and apologize for their absence.
Presentation of petitions. Presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I'm commanded to lay the following documents. The Barbados National Oil Company Limited Annual Report and Audited Financial Statements for the year ended March 31st, 2016. Immigration Students Amendment Regulations 2019. Duties, taxes, and other payments exemption, Bank of New York Mellon Corporation, Order 2019.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate. Moved by a minister.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 22-1 and 45-2 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Standing Orders 22-1 and 45-2 be suspended for the balance of today's sitting. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and the two standing orders are hereby suspended.
Mr. President, I beg to move, in the absence of the Deputy President, Senator Greenidge, I beg to move that Senator Nurse be appointed Chairman of Committee for today's sitting.
The question is that in the absence of the Deputy President, that Senator Nurse be appointed for the balance of today's sitting to be Chairman of Committees. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
I think so too.
You have a new role.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Senator Nurse presides as Deputy President in your absence. I beg to move that Senator Nurse for today's sitting would also be the Deputy President.
There's an amendment to the earlier motion, and it is that Senator Nurse not only be Chairman of committees, but that he be Deputy President for the balance of today's sitting. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the motion is carried by acclaim.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the following bills. The Economic Partnership Agreement between the Caribbean Community, the Dominican Republic, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Bill 2019. The Foundation's Repeal Bill 2019. The Companies Economic Substance Bill 2019. The Companies Number 2 Bill 2019. The Corporate and Trust Service Providers Bill 2019. the Limited Partnership Amendment Bill 2019, and the Societies with Limited Liability Amendment Bill 2019. Mr. President, I just want to make an amendment. It should be the Corporate and Trust Service Providers Amendment Bill 2019. Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading of the following bills. The Economic Partnership Agreement between the Caribbean Community, the Dominican Republic, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, Bill 2019. The Foundations Repeal Bill 2019. The Companies Economic Substance Bill 2019. The Companies Number 2 Bill 2019. The Corporate and Trust Service Providers Amendment Bill 2019, the Limited Partnership Amendment Bill 2019, the Societies with Limited Liability Amendment Bill 2019, and the Sacramental Cannabis Bill 2019.
Public business. Order number 2, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to resume the debate on the second reading of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Amendment Bill 2019.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, I recognize Senator Maynard.
Mr. President, I take this opportunity to rise to speak in this continuing debate on a matter which will change the way we do things. I first want to begin by saying that there's no wrong time to do the right thing. And likewise, there is no right time to do the wrong thing. Now, my colleague, Senator Walcott, when he introduced this bill, did not speak sufficiently about his courage. So I want to speak about his courage. When the Haynes Commission was held and it made recommendations, and the government of the day decided to implement the recommendations of the Haynes Commission, my colleague, Senator Walcott, presided over the transition of the QEH from a department of the Ministry of Health to a statutory corporation. It was not easy. There were many naysayers, but he prevailed. And he fought pitched battles with the trade unions over the matter. And he insisted that the structure of governance in the QEH should have been a board with an independent chairman and a CEO. And he transitioned the board at a time when there were only 9 board members, and the minister at the time only appointed 3, quite unlike the weighted board we have now, which is about to be made even more so. My colleague had a chairman who was almost invisible, but he got the job done. He wasn't at all times present within the hospital, and he functioned like a chairman should. Now, Mr. President, there is no right time to do the wrong thing. The Hayes Commission recommended that the QEH should move to a statutory corporation to remove some of the bureaucracy and the red tape and the political interference in the day-to-day management of the hospital. And we've seen that it can work. No system is perfect. And one always has to bear in mind that anytime you set something up, you might have to come back and tweak it. Usually, you don't disassemble it. Now, I have listened to comments and arguments as to why it was wrong to have had a situation existing in the Barbados Water Authority where the positions of chairman and CEO were blurred, and that separation has been clearly reestablished. And if, Mr. President, it was wrong there, it cannot be right here. Now, this is not new. And what we appear to be attempting to do with this amendment is to reverse a structure of good corporate governance that we have in many other boards. Back in the 80s, Mr. Chairman, the late Tom Adams had an impasse with the president of the Barbados National Bank. Mr. President, you might have been part of the whole process. And that impasse was resolved on Christmas Eve one year when the Prime Minister of the day accepted the resignation of the President on Christmas Eve. And he came to Parliament and amended the Barbados National Bank Act and created two separate posts, a managing director and the chairman of the board. Mr. President, if it was right then, it cannot be wrong now. Senator Walcott, who I know knows that there's no right time to do the wrong thing, was adamant during the transition of the QEH that certain things should be in place, and he stuck to it. But he transitioned the QEH at the time with a gentleman sitting in the chair as the first CEO who was accused of sitting on the opposite side of the political divide. He later rose to be the chairman, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Health before he resigned. But he transitioned the QEH with Senator Walcott, and they did it together. So he has shown that it's possible to work with all sorts of people, even political opposites, and get it right. Yes. Mr. President, my colleague commented on the problems with nursing in the QEH. And last time I stood in this chamber, I accurately said that the nursing role was 35 short. And we've admitted at the time, at the last sitting, when we discussed this bill, that had risen to 50. I dare say it is now going past 50. But I'm pleased to see that the government, for the first time, has taken steps. I will ignore asides. Mr. President, I am pleased to see that government is taking steps to fix some of the problems with nursing. I am pleased that government has sat down with the Nursing Council and the Barbados Community College, and I assume the Ministry of Education, and looked to deal with the issue of the rate of failure of our young nurses who have failed the regional exam. And we must not listen to people who have unfortunately believed that we should dismiss this exam and forget about it. It's an essential part of being who we are in CARICOM. And this type of regional exam in the future will not only be part of nursing, but it will probably be part of medicine. And we should not attempt to reduce standards to fit what we have, but raise the bar. So I commend the government for the efforts. Now, Mr. President, there has been a lot of discussion and talk about our recent journey back home and the need to get nurses to come to the QEH to increase numbers. But while we do that, we cannot allow the cane fields to burn. I recently saw, Mr. President, an article in a newspaper. I read an article in a newspaper, Mr. President, where a senior journalist took the opportunity while he was grieving to bash the institution. And those who have that level of journalistic authority should not abuse it. It has not done us any good. And if we feel it necessary to write about the ills, we should, in the same article, write about how we should fix it. And fix it without prejudice. Because it is harder to build back than it is to knock down. Now, Mr. President, in that article and at a recent party political gathering, and also my colleague, Senator Walcott, mentioned $13 million that was unaccounted for. And this turned up in an audit of stock at the QEH. And I would like to believe that all of these statements were made having seen the report, and they're not just innuendo. I myself tried to get a copy of the report, but I was denied by the board. I suppose with good reason. So, but I can tell you, Mr. President, that the common statement is being said that money is not the problem may be true, and it's probably true. But I will tell you what the problems are. The Caring Board at the QEH brought in a consultant to do an audit of the procurement department. And the consultant shut down the supply chain for 2 months in our hospital. He did the unthinkable, and the board allowed it, Mr. President. But no one wants to speak of it. So the stockouts and the shortages we have now are a direct consequence of his actions, sanctioned by the board. Mr. President, this audit and this shutdown of the supply chain coincided with government's internal debt restructuring, when suppliers were being offered 85 cents in dollar with terms. There were separate issues, however, when they were put together, it made matters worse. We have not recovered, and we continue to have shortages, some of which are almost impossible to fix. Now, it's been said that government took over all the QEH debt. Mr. President, it is not. That matter related, as far as I understand it, to the QEH's internal debt. It appears as though some of the QEH's debt was not paid, and that is no fault of government. Consequently, radioactive materials used in our treatment of patients have not been available. It is not the government's fault. It rests squarely with the board. So my patients and others cannot be treated or investigated because for 6 months we have not had the necessary therapeutic or diagnostic radioactive materials. Somebody has to be responsible. And whoever is responsible has to stand up and take responsibility for it. We cannot hide, continue to hide and say, money is not the problem. It is not the problem. So someone has to take responsibility for it and to fix it. Mr. President, there is no wrong time to do the right thing. Now, the QH has not had audited financial statements since 2011. And yet, we have shown and accepted the comment that there is a $13 million deficit. Mr. President, there is lots and lots and lots of old dead stock that you cannot write off. And any hospital who at the end of its financial year has no dead stock doesn't have enough supplies. It means you never had enough and you were always short. I'm not suggesting that you cannot have dead stock because you wasted it and didn't use it. But what I'm saying is that if you have dead stock laying around and you're accounting for it, it will add to what will be your deficit. Mr. President, the Honorable Prime Minister fought and approved $10 million for upgrading of the infrastructure of the A&E at a time when this country is cash-strapped. $10 million. And all that has happened is some holes have been dug in the ground and plans have been drawn. Nothing else has happened. And our people continue to pile up in the A&E. I would like some answers, Mr. President. I would like to hear when we are going to start to fix the problem that we're committed to. Because it's our people who are suffering, our parents and grandparents and aunts and cousins and uncles and friends and enemies too. But we need to fix it. And if we have the money to fix it, we should get on with the business of fixing it. So those who are put in charge of fixing it need to get up and fix it. The overcrowding in the QEH, Mr. President, has lots of facets. And one of the biggest sources for the traffic, apart from the visitors, which we can't stop, are our patients, many of whom do not need to be in the QEH. And maybe government needs to look to see whether there is some opportunity somewhere nearby where we can decant some of the traffic from within the QEH to outside of the QEH. I am told there's a nice building sitting in Column that's unoccupied. Mr. President, in the last budget, titled Stay the Course, there was a concept introduced called participatory democracy. I loved it. I called a friend in Scotland and said, look on YouTube on Barbados Parliament Live and see how we do things here. Last time I did that with him was when Brian Lara set his first record in cricket. I felt exceptionally proud as a Barbadian to see it. And Mr. President, I want to read a few lines from the budget in section 1, where it speaks to participatory democracy. And it says, we changed the structure of the estimates debate so that for the first time in Parliament's 380-year history, parliamentarians could quiz not only the ministers, but high public officials implementing policy to understand firsthand and independently what the issues are. This is part of the process of reducing political interference by moving these independent officials back to the center of policy implementation and opening them to greater scrutiny. This is participatory democracy. Mr. President, that suggests that we are accountable now for what we do in a very open way. And we should not be hiding anywhere and hiding things from people. Mr. President, I believe that change needs to come to our hospital, and it needs to come sooner rather than later. But there is no right time to do the wrong thing. And it's not so much what we do, but how we do it. Now, Mr. President, I am sure that my colleagues will comment on the amendments which we seek to make to the QH Act. But I can't help but ask, how does one person sit in the role as administrator 1 minute and then switch to the boardroom in the evening and do both jobs effectively? And what will be the oversight? And I'm not going to get into what will happen when there's a change of government, which there inevitably will be, whenever that happens. But there will be a change, and what problems this poses. Mr. President, there is no right time to do the wrong thing. Finally, Mr. President, I want to refer to something that I wish I did not have to do. I want to refer to the supreme law of this country, the Constitution. Section 35 of the Constitution, Mr. President, speaks to how Parliament is constituted. And Section 636 speaks to the composition of the Senate. And I want to say here and now that I stand in this chamber because I was appointed by the Governor General as an independent senator. And I will not be bullied by any chairman. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
What's in the paper in circulation?
Tell me, Kristen, who are you? I don't think
I don't know who's speaking.
Who's the next speaker? We normally have a
Senator Wiggins.
not then.
senator. Senator Wiggins, I recognize Senator Wiggins.
Good morning, Mr. President, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Amendment Bill 2019. Well, I'm not a medical expert like Dr. Warner Maynard, and so I have to speak from a layman's point of view. What I can say to you in terms of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital is that my father helped build it. My father worked on the Queen Elizabeth Hospital when we were children. And I remember my first visit to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. It was not a good one because someone was working on our house. My father told us not to go around the house where the carpenter was, and a chisel fell and hit me at the top of my head. Indeed, that's it. So that was my first visit to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So moving on from there, I would say the other experiences I had at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, my two children were born at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I remember when you were going to your gynecologist for everyday treatment, it was, are you going to have your babies at QEH, or are you going to have your babies at Bayview, as it was then? And we opted to go to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital because we thought we would get excellent care, and if there's an emergency, you would not have to be moved in the middle of the night to rush over to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So those were my experiences at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, I would say, essentially in my lifetime, besides visiting, patients in hospital. For many years, Mr. President, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital has been a political football. Just like the NHS in the UK, it was used as the political football for Brexit. And that has come about because it's an emotional situation, because when you think about going to a hospital, you think about life and death. And because of the situation with life and death, people feel that you can appeal to people's emotions and you can talk about the hospital in a negative way because it is going to attract a lot of attention on the ground. I would say to you, yes, I would like to see the Queen Elizabeth Hospital improved because again, when I was in England, I had to go to Guy's Hospital and I had an operation there. And I would say that, you know, the conditions there were really excellent and it would be nice for our hospital to move to that sort of situation. I would love to see it. Mr. President, one of the things that is going around is the appointment of the executive chairman of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. My position on that is that a prime minister has the right to appoint anybody that she feels like or he feels like to any position in the country, because that is what people vote for confidence. They vote for prime minister who can appoint anyone. And I would say to the honorable members in this chamber, I was appointed Deputy High Commissioner to London, and it caused all kind of confusion and negative talk. So I know when you are appointed by a prime minister, people would have a lot to say. But a prime minister has the right to appoint anyone he or she feels like, in my humble opinion, to a position, especially if the person is competent. And then you have to judge that person by the results. You have to judge that person by the results. And I will stand up here boldly and tell you all, I have known the executive chairman designate for over 25 years. I know her very well. And she has always been an outstanding and a very excellent person. I have known her and I can speak to the person. And I remember on campus, because that's where I really met her professors used to speak about the quality of that person. She was always excellent in everything she did. And for people not to know, I mean, you got to marry somebody sometime. And because she's married to someone on a member of the Barbados Labour Party, that does not mean that she is not a competent person to do the job. And I want people in Barbados not to become so polarized that because you are affiliated with someone, that you cannot be appointed to the job. Right here in this Senate, all these women that sit in this Senate are bright and beautiful and strong women. And I admire each woman that is in this Senate. And I can say to you, when I was in London serving, when I had trade issues to deal with, I would contact Lisa Cummins as she was then, and Lisa would provide information for me on trade. So the thing is that when you start to discuss issues and so on, you have to look at the person, because if at the time, if I wanted information on trade unionism, I would contact somebody from the Barbados Workers Union, because it wasn't Senator Moore then. You have to be able to relate to people regardless of which side of the fence they sit on. And I will say it again, all the women in this Senate are strong, bright, and beautiful women. And they can be appointed to any position. And I really want to, the truth is, I don't really want to single out, but as soon as you start singling out, you get in real trouble. But I want to single out Senator Cummins again. She is, I believe, the first chairman at the port, the first female to be appointed chairman at the port. And Senator Cummins has unraveled that port. Because people thought that the port was like a mafia organization. And unraveled to the extent that she has gone in there and looked at the systems in there and see how there can be improvements at the port. And I'm saying the incoming executive chairman is also of that quality. She was appointed also to do some consultancy work as a lead consultant on the World Bank Fund for National Strategic Plan for HIV, and she was appointed to that job by the previous Prime Minister. There's nothing wrong with that. If the person is competent, why can't you not appoint them? And she has had real international experience working with CAMPAC, PANCAP, and Deauville. So she has done a lot of work, and I can tell you all that because I know, and because I know her, and I know her well. I have been in a situation when I came back to Barbados from London, and I was looking for consultancy work. That same individual pointed me to areas where I can find consultancy work, to do consultancy work, because this is what she does. I was in another situation where I could not move, and she offered me a cup of tea and sandwiches. That's the type of person that she is. I know her, and I know her well, and I'm asking the public of Barbados to give the incoming chairman a chance. Judge her by the results. And I would say, in terms of the results of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, these are not results that can be turned around in 1 year. This is an animal that needs to be grabbed and really, for change, and she has to do it brick by brick, block by block. I see recently she had just returned from Guyana as well, this is what I'm seeing in the press, to help recruit nurses, because we know there is a shortage of nurses at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And I believe, according to what I heard in the news, that these nurses will be probably starting sometime next year. And I heard Senator Maynard said just now that there was no money. I'm not sure about the financial position at the hospital, but I know that this new board at the hospital, I know, have done without a capital works budget. They have refurbished the nurses' lounge and the general workers area and lunchroom. They have also beefed up the security, because nowadays you cannot take a chance in terms of people coming into the hospital, because people might come into the hospital to do people harm. So they have upgraded the CCTV scanners, and they're going to be installing other security issues so that people can feel safe when they go to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So contrary to popular belief, by the way, as far as I'm aware, she has not yet been appointed. So people are out there talking about her, but she is currently the chairman. And as chairman, when you sit on the board as chairman, you can institute measures, and that's what she has been doing. But she has not been appointed. And as I said, I want people to give her a chance so that she can do the job that she is doing without pay currently. It is just that she be continuing doing what she's doing, but as executive chairman, and people in Barbados, again, have to stop being so polarized. It is a very dangerous journey that we can go down on. So I am very much afforded the opportunity to know that there are other areas that you can improve at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital currently, and you can speak to the whole issue of the ambulance service. Because as far as I'm aware, if you call for an ambulance after hours, so there are always areas for improvements, and these are areas where she and the board will have to look at, where you can call for an ambulance and be able to get an ambulance to have medical help any 24 hours on the clock, because when it is late, apparently you can't really get an ambulance. And one of the things also that we have to look at in terms of going forward for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital is care of the elderly. I know because of there's a shortage at the geriatric hospitals and so on, a lot of elderly people are left at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Mr. President, and it is not necessarily medical care in the sense that they're sick, but somewhere for them to stay. So I think that we're going to have to look at that area of the care for the elderly and in terms of their ongoing medical care, to provide room and spaces and beds for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Also, we look at the whole question of philanthropy. Lots of people overseas want to donate items, sometimes money and so on, to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And because of the fact that it is not just you say, come, I'm gonna donate 10 beds or so on, there's a protocol involved in, dealing with philanthropic organizations. And I think that we should more or less let the general public know and let the persons, especially in the diaspora, because with the gathering 2020 that's coming forward, a lot of Barbadians abroad, Mr. President, would want to donate to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And I think that we should be able to tell them what is the process, what is the procedure in terms of being able to donate to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, so that when they come here, they always think, you see, they don't want anything from us, but in fact, they want to, but there is a process that has to be followed. And I think that these are one of the first things that they have to do. I heard Senator Maynard spoke to the whole issue of the inventory management systems at the hospital. I think going forward as well, there has to be a modernization of inventory management. So in terms of these stockouts and stock counts and so on, because for a hospital, you can't afford to have drugs that are sitting in inventory for long periods of time, because I think they would expire, drugs expire, Mr. President. So there are a number of areas, yes, for improvement at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And you know something? I feel that we as Barbadians can also offer suggestions, because some people, again, who live overseas, who work overseas for whatever reason, there are good things that we can take from other jurisdictions, Mr. President, which can be implemented at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So I would ask all Barbadians in the diaspora, especially those who are coming home for the 2020 revision, that they can offer suggestions to government, not just be out there criticizing every move. Every government in Barbados, whether it's B or D, has Barbados's best interests at heart. And the Queen Elizabeth Hospital is one of those institutions that should never be made into political football, because the patients become the collateral damage. And I think that we have to look at those situations. Yes, there are people like my colleague, Senator Maynard here, who would have information that I don't know about, because I don't know anything about the internal workings of the hospital. I speak as an outsider, things that I know generally. And so, Mr. President, with those few words, I'm very happy to be able to stand up and support the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Amendment Bill 2019. And thank you very kindly for giving me that opportunity, sir. I thank you.
Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. President. This debate has run over a few sessions, and we've heard some impassioned contributions. I think that is as it should be, because alongside access to high-quality education, certain guarantees of due process in our legal system, sits the pillar of access to high-quality, affordable health services. So I do understand that we all speak with a certain amount of passion. I was struck, I think one of the earliest contributions came from Senator Drakes, and I don't think I'm wrong in saying, as several other senators who have reservations and indeed opposition to this bill, this amendment, she focused on this, what's called duality in corporate governance, the combining of a CEO with a chairman, one person occupying both roles. And she cited, I think it's the International Federation of Accountants report 2014, and certain principles of what constitute good governance, and these are things like transparency, accountability, responsibility, strong audit practice, and so on. Senator Moore didn't cite that report, but she also had reservations about combining these roles. And of course, we heard a few moments ago from Senator Maynard who kind of gave us an insider's view, 35 years experience as a medical professional. So he understands how a hospital operates on the ground. But he also made this distinction that combining these two roles was an affront almost to the principles of what constitutes good corporate governance. And I think I've heard Senator Drake even say that it's an inherent conflict of interest. I know you will intervene if I get this wrong. And I believe I'm not misquoting you when you said this bill would facilitate abuses of power. Now, I'm not a medical professional, Senator Wiggins. I'm in the same camp as you. So I can't contradict the operational detail of what Senator Maynard sees on the ground. I know a little bit about corporate governance, and I want to focus on that in my contribution. This idea that you have to have two people, one in the chair and one in CEO, in order to guarantee good performance, or indeed to enhance the quality of corporate governance in any given organization. Mr. President, one of my very first jobs, full-time job, rather than a guy cutting sandwiches at the beach in a beach bar, was as a civil servant in the UK for their Ministry of Finance. Her Majesty's Treasury, they call it, but it's just the Ministry of Finance. And my time there overlapped with the publication of something called the Cadbury Report. Now, some of you may not know what the Cadbury Report is. It started out as a commission headed up by Lord Cadbury, who was asked to look into the occurrences of accountancy fraud in particular in two companies in the UK. One people have largely forgotten about, but the other turned into a media circus. It was a company called Polypec, and it was run by a guy called Azil Nadir. And now it started off with that as the tapestry in the background. But as the commission continued, other scandals broke. Perhaps the most notable one, and again, those who are my age or thereabouts will remember this, involved Robert Maxwell, who at the time owned the Daily Mirror, fell off his boat one day, drowned, and posthumously he was found to have been raiding his pension fund, his employees' pension fund, to the tune of £400 million. Azil Nadir, his fraud was £150 million. So Lord Cadbury, he started to take account of those things as well. Then came the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, which was far greater than a simple accountancy fraud. It actually involved international money laundering and the financing of terrorist activities. So that commission, which was founded initially just to look at accountancy fraud, really had to come up with a set of recommendations that would cover everything. And it is true. In order to prevent reoccurrences of what Robert Maxwell did or Azil Nadir did, and they were both chairmen and CEOs, there was this idea that you didn't want to place unfettered power into the hands of a single individual for fear that they would abuse that power. That was a Cadbury recommendation. Now, if we stop right there, and I should preface what comes next with the information that the Cadbury report is really the root of all the corporate codes that have subsequently followed. So, for example, the International Federation of Accountants, when they cite things like transparency, accountability, and so on, Cadbury's original founding principles, if you like, were that you had to be accountable, responsible, transparent, and fair. Fairness was a large thing. Everything that has followed since in Western Europe and North America, my knowledge doesn't stretch much beyond those ones, has been based on what came out of the Cadbury report. He had this recommendation of two people in two roles, but he also said if those roles were combined in a single person, that stakeholders, shareholders, and in this case senators, they deserved an explanation as to why that is. Now, this principle is called the comply or explain principle, and it's built in to sound corporate governance codes. Why did he do that? He did that because he recognized that if you take a single corporate governance structure and impose it in two different situations, you should expect two different results. One size doesn't fit all. One of my grandmothers, she had this expression, horses for courses. You don't send out a steeplechaser on the flat. This is the huge distinction he saw, that you had to adapt for circumstances. So on the one hand, you've got these principles of accountability, responsibility, fairness, and transparency, and then you've got how are you going to deliver those? And if you just say it's a one-size-fits-all situation, you're doing yourself a disservice. You have to take account of the context. And that's a critical part, I think, that those senators who have expressed reservations may be overlooking. Now, Cadbury's report was published in the mid-1990s, and since then there's been a large body of research that's investigated this very specific question of what is the impact, this duality, combining these two roles in one person. And there are people who review this body of research from time to time. I mean, I have one here. I haven't cherry-picked it. It's from the University of Stanford. Two researchers called David Larker and Brian Tayan. And they reviewed all the literature that has looked specifically at this question. Some of it looked at the private sector, some of it the public sector. There are even examples in the health sector. And what they found, with over 20 years research in the bank, was that whether those two roles are separated or not, does not have a material impact in explaining either the quality of corporate good governance or the subsequent performance of the firm. How do you square that with what we've heard before us? Well, a large part of it is the context. You have to select the appropriate context for what's sitting in front of you. These two guys, these two researchers, they went further and they actually carried out their own sample of the Fortune 1000 seller companies in the US. And these are very large and very small companies. They took a representative sample. They found over a 20-year period, starting with when it became fashionable in the wake of these accounting scandals and the rest, BCCI and the rest, when it became fashionable to separate the roles, that many companies did so. Today, I think the proportion is, I want to say 50-50. It just depends on the size of the company, but that is a fair approximation. But what they found in their sample was that of those companies that had separated the role, fully 1/3 of them recombined those roles. Now you have to ask yourself why that is. Circumstances change. Now, if I pick up on one of Senator Maynard's aphorisms there, it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. Circumstances change, you have to adapt. Now, that research was published in 2016. The trend has continued. There was a company, I'm pretty sure everybody will know it, Caterpillar, a gigantic company, earth-moving equipment, construction. The back end of 2018, their board agreed to recombine those roles. They were one of those companies that had separated them. So they authorized their CEO to write to the shareholders, and he said this, he was explaining, comply and explain, why they were recombining the roles. And he said, recombining those roles would provide unified leadership and direction for the company. Unified leadership and direction. And provide a single, clear focus for the chain of command to execute the company's strategy and business plans. It's a concrete example of a change of circumstances demanding a change in structure. What I'm getting at, Mr. President, is starting with Cadbury, he recognized through intuition, without the data, that circumstances might dictate the structure that you use in any given organization. Now we have a bank of research that we can look at, and it kind of confirms his intuition. You have to adapt to what is in front of you. It should be clear that no single structure guarantees the quality of your corporate good governance or the performance of your organization. There are other factors that matter there, and I'm going to speak to them near the end of my contribution. One of them is context. I know how hard it is to persuade people out of their views, and I'm sure this is one such case. Indeed, we were talking about that this morning before the Senate started. People get entrenched, and even data sometimes will not persuade them. You know, there was a time we thought the earth was flat. One day a guy sailed off to the west, he reappeared in the east, and we realized it can't be flat. Once upon a time we thought the earth was the center of the universe. You know, Galileo looked through a telescope, made some observations, hypothesized it wasn't the case. Let's forget for a second that his inquisitors imprisoned him for the rest of his life for holding those views, but he was right. And closer to home, there are people who deny climate change, despite the science that's sitting right there. There's a cost to denying research, denying science, denying evidence. Sometimes it's a cost of inertia, not making a decision, and sometimes it's a cost of taking the wrong decision based on simply not accounting for everything that's out there. I'm fearful that we're going to get hung up on that when the evidence says, you know what, this is a perfectly legitimate move and redesign, and it's appropriate to our circumstances. Unified leadership and direction, a single clear focus. Those are the things that we need to really take account of. A couple of times we've talked about checks and balances and oversight. I think there are a couple of important points here, and I'm going to feed into some of the operational comments that Senator Maynard made. But the first one, just this amendment. Now, there is oversight on the executive chair, and this is the minister. Now, I know that sounds unacceptable to some people, and I know there's been a change from the Ministry of Health to a statutory body. But I would point this out. Anybody, and I suspect that's most people here, but anybody who has experience of sitting on a board or being the CEO or being a board member, probably, if on reflection, will realize that the real hard role to fill there is not the CEO's role. You can find these candidates, you can qualify them. The tough role is to get a good chairman. It's hard to find a good chairman who doesn't want to compete with the CEO, who is as expert in the field as the CEO, who recognizes that his function is to complement, is a team worker with the CEO. That role is the hardest one to fill on a board. And that is why alignment of interests sometimes becomes a casualty. The very idea that accountability is one of the guiding principles of good corporate governance gets endangered when you have a chairman in conflict with the CEO. And it can happen for a variety of reasons. And I'd suggest that in the majority of cases, the chairman is the one it's hard to get a good person in to provide adequate oversight. Now I look at this setup with the minister and the executive chair. I've listened to Senator Maynard's description and some of the anecdotal stories about the state of the hospital. Now, the executive chair and the minister, they have huge reputational risk riding on the delivery of good performance. They have an aligned interest there that a chairman doesn't necessarily always have. But a minister and the executive chair in this case, if they don't get it right, there's going to be fallout. They can't hide from that. It is transparent. So that would be my first comment simply on the bill. Now, the most interesting remarks in my mind that Senator Maynard made concerned the board and failures he identified in the current board. We haven't spoken much about the underlying act here, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Act. But that has a whole section that lays out the duties and obligations of board members. I don't propose to read them all out, but there's one that struck me, and it's section 6.1d. And it says this: one of the board's functions is to manage the operation of the hospital and control the activities within the hospital to ensure continuous improvement in the quality of the care of patients. Manage the operation, ensure continuous improvement. These are very heavy operational demands placed on the directors and the board members. Now, the Act allows that responsibility to be delegated to the executive chair under the proposed amendment of this bill. But it doesn't discharge board members from a responsibility to ensure these things are done. Manage the operation of the hospital, control the activities, ensure continuous improvement. And they can revoke this delegation to the executive chair at any time. But they carry a big responsibility. I think sometimes what we see in legislation, for sure, I'm almost, I never bet 100%, but I bet close to it, is we have a gap between what is written in the Act and what we see on the ground, the execution. There's a difference between how potentially board members conduct themselves and how they are supposed to conduct themselves. I don't believe this bill or the underlying Act have any particular fault. I think the fault lies elsewhere. I want to come on to that in a moment, but inciting the oversight of the minister on the chair and the responsibility of the board members, I really want to return to this idea that this bill is facilitating abuses of power. It cannot be so. These oversights are in place. There is no way you're putting unfettered power into the hands of a single person under what is proposed. The underlying bill hasn't been changed for a start. And the amended bill itself is really designed to ensure this unified leadership and direction and clear single focus. Now, I'd be negligent if I didn't give my ideas about what the real problem is here. I don't find fault with the bill. I think any given structure stands or falls on details. This structure, I think, is appropriate. And I think perhaps the faults of the past and the current state lie, the responsibility of those lies in the details. And there are three in particular that would concern me. One is the definition of roles and responsibilities, especially at the leadership structure. Does the minister understand the limits of his roles? Does the executive chair appreciate how far that power runs? Do the board members understand how they interact? If those roles and responsibilities aren't clearly defined in the minds of the participants, there will be a problem. Secondly, I touched on it before, but this alignment of interests. That has to be up and down the organization. If you don't have that, you have an organization working against itself. And I think some of the stories and evidence presented by Senator Maynard perhaps speak to that. But those details are things that it is the responsibility of the management team now to set right. This bill is not a proxy on what we believe to be the quality or non-quality of the person sitting in there, and it's certainly not a proxy on the current state of affairs. This bill is separate. This is about what is the appropriate structure to fix things. The third, the final detail that's important, and I'm not sure this is done anywhere, but it's essential. And indeed, it's one of the things that Lord Cadbury at the time wanted to put in the report, but he could not get it. He didn't have buy-in from the UK government. And it was this idea of a continuous appraisal of board members. There's a peer review, an annual peer review to make sure that Section 6.1d, that they're following that. That's absolutely key. You can have the structure. It doesn't explain performance or the quality of governance. That lies in the details and the context. This bill and the underlying act place a lot of responsibility on the board. I think it's the right structure, but we have to close this gap between theory and practice. I support this bill, and I urge colleagues who do have those reservations not to hang their argument on the separation of those two powers. I mentioned Galileo and the Inquisition. He invited his inquisitors to look through the telescope to see for themselves. This is a Google search away. Look through the telescope. I support the bill. I'm obliged to, sir.
Senator Tate, it is now your turn.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this afternoon, my contribution is going to be what I believe now that I've been here for as long as I've been here, as usual. My issue is with the way the bill has been drafted. It is unfortunate, I find, that the way that the bill was introduced in the other place has caused persons to focus on the individual rather than the bill and what is proposed within the bill. Frankly, I don't think it was fair to her at all. But that is what happened. So we now have people coming to the Senate and saying we should support the bill because she's qualified and she's the right person for the job. That's not the point. That's not what the bill is about. Actually, when I look through the bill, the bill is silent on the qualifications of the individual who is to be chosen as the executive chairman. So that's the first thing that is wrong with this whole process. There was a lot of announcement and she's this and she's that. That's not the point. And that is not fair to her, I find, and that's wrong. Because when it's not her and it's somebody else, how do you ascertain the qualifications? The bill is silent. We're not supposed to be making, Senator Grant said it, let's not make this political or partisan. I love when politicians say these things because everything is political and partisan. I know the designate, that's what we're calling her now, poor soul. She would be a colleague because she is of the legal profession. I have never worked from my memory with the designate. I have no issue with the designate. As far as I'm concerned, if it is that we had qualifications and she qualifies, to me it is irrelevant that she happens to be the wife of a member of parliament. Because if it was me and I was qualified, I would want the position if I was interested in the job. The focus has been wrong. Yes. And therefore, examining the bill has fallen along the wayside. The bill has flaws. So whatever the intention is, and however qualified the designate is, if you don't fix the bill, you're going to have confusion and problems. That's the way I see it. So as usual, I'm going to highlight the flaws, Mr. President. I know that Senator Adams makes much about the fact that I make a lot of to-do about commas and full stops and blanks and spaces. Yeah, but you did it once, I can talk about it forever. But this bill is beyond the usual full stop, comma, spaces. I would like clarity on a number of points, Mr. President, because the way this bill reads, removing the designate, you cannot ascertain if the executive chairman is a fish or a fowl because of how this is drafted. So, sir, to follow me, I encourage you, sir, to look at the bill and everyone else so that I don't confuse you and so that you can keep up with what I'm talking about. Now, in clause 9A, clause 4, which would be the proposed 9A, which is on page 5. I can do pages in the Senate. It says, and I quote, the minister shall, which means it got to happen. It's not a may, it's a shall. With the approval of the cabinet, appoint an executive chairman. Let's stop there. So we have a minister employing with the appointment of the cabinet. Now, when you have 72 seats in Parliament, please come in. She ain't hear me.
I heard you 72 seats in Parliament.
Good. You can do anything. But my issue is draft properly. So I'm going to go on. So the minister shall, with the approval of cabinet, appoint an executive chairman. Let's nip across now to page 6. Look down at the bottom at the proposed clause 9B. The executive chairman shall not be removed without the approval of the minister. So she has to be appointed with the approval, not she, Kadir. The executive chairman, I'm going to say EC if I remember for the rest of my presentation, sir. The EC has to be appointed by the minister with the approval of the cabinet, but she can be fired if the minister gets vexed with her or him, without any intervention of the cabinet. What is that about? What is her protection? What if the prime minister gets vexed with the minister of health? What happens to the EC? Because the EC was appointed with the approval of the cabinet, but the EC can be fired just by the minister. Now, let's go back. Now remember where we at? The EC is appointed by who? The minister with who? The approval of the cabinet. But then, lo and behold, same page 5, proposed clause 9A2. The executive chairman is an employee of the hospital and is subject to the directions of the board and is responsible to the board for the execution of its policy and the management of its affairs. So you have an executive chairman who is appointed by a minister with the approval of the cabinet, but she still or he is still an employee of the hospital, so must answer to the board. So the board is her or his boss. If you are an employee of the hospital, you should have been a part of an interview process. If you are an employee of the hospital, you should have been shortlisted. You should be aware of the qualifications. You should be able to apply for this job. I'm just saying. But in this situation, we have an executive chairman who is both. And I'm not talking about fusing or standalone, Senator Adams. I just want clarity. You cannot be drafting like we are a banana republic, Mr. President. The way that we're getting this type of legislation with all this kind of uncertainty and all this lack of clarity suggests that we do not know what we are doing. That is not right. And if you're going to draft like that, bring somebody from CPC or whoever is responsible for drafting and put them to sit here so that when we have queries, they can be corrected on the spot. This is nonsense. This should never come to us like this. This Senate is highly qualified. It has highly qualified persons who are reviewing this legislation for real. The submissions that we get in the Senate are not from people who are not reading. Don't mind we're paid $1,400 $479.07 a month. Don't mind that.
Only that?
Only that, Senator Moore.
I don't see it.
You don't see it? Oh. The point is, we're reading, we're doing research, we are paying attention. Stop disrespecting us by sending this type of legislation up here. I go on, Mr. President, passionate as I may be, hoarse as I may be. Let us look at proposed clause 9A3 on the top of page 6. Lord, now, we just were told she's an employee, or he, and is subject to direction of the board. Then we get this clause. The board may employ the executive chairman at such remuneration or on such terms and conditions of what? What terms, what conditions? No, the clause ain't finished. You have to say what you're saying. The board, first of all, I don't understand this part, but the board may employ the executive chairman. The minister already appointed the executive chairman. We now telling the board that they may employ the executive chairman. The board now trumping the chairman, the minister and the cabinet. Stop it. Stop it with this nonsense and this drafting. Now this clause, the board may employ the executive chairman at such remuneration or on such terms and conditions as what? That he get up in the morning or they get up in the morning and decide? Finish your clauses. This is incomplete. Do not send me a bill with incomplete information, Mr. President. On what terms and what condition and what remuneration? What are you doing? Okay. Now, let's go on to proposed clause 9A4. The executive chairman shall report directly to the minister on matters related to the overall operations and resources of the hospital and on matters pertaining to the board. But she's an employee of the hospital, and she got an answer to the board. Help me to understand what you are doing with this executive chairman. Who is the executive chairman boss? Who is going to appraise her? Who's going to discipline her? And I keep saying her, Kadir. Who is going to appraise the person? Who is going to discipline the person? Who is going to determine if the person is entitled to incremental increases? Who is the boss? I say again, fish or fowl, Mr. President. I remain confused. Senator Drakes and Senator Moore spoke about transparency and self-governance and all of that. And the truth is that this type of appointment will cause a stir for a lot of reasons. How it was done, who the person is, all of that comes with being political. Fortunately for me, I am not.
Whoa.
I am an independent senator.
Extreme.
I am to look after the interests of the people of Barbados. That is my mandate. That is my remit. So this is my question, Mr. President. This is my question. If the executive chairman shall be appointed by the minister with the approval of the board, but is an employee of the hospital and must answer to the board that may appoint them, but they shall report to the minister. Y'all keeping up? No. You can't keep up? My question is, what is the protection of the executive chairman if anything happens? Because with all of this confusion, does the Employment Rights Act apply to that person? And I am saying anytime the Minister of Health changes or the government changes, the executive chairman is going to cost Barbados unfair dismissal damages, because you would never have been in a position to do the progressive discipline that the ERA calls for. You're gonna have to get rid of this person, therefore you're gonna have to pay them. And might I say, as you would know, Mr. President, the damages under the ERA are higher than the damages under the Severance Payment Act. So this person will be paid unfair damages because you cannot and you will not have been preparing for that person's demise. The person does not have the protection of the Employment Rights Act as I see it, because first of all, who is that person's boss? If the board is the person's boss and the person is the executive chairman of the board, who is going to implement the progressive discipline for that person if the person needs to be disciplined. I'm more interested in if the person is being unfair. If the person is being unfair by somebody, where does that person go, Mr. President? This here is unnecessary confusion. You want the person, you're gonna bring the person. All I'm asking is that you do your legislation properly. Come on, rush, rush, rush. It's time to stop. It's overdone and over, it's too much. And then you're bringing it to me. I cannot come into this place and approve badly drafted legislation that is incomplete, all kind of. Page 7, Mr. President. Proposed clause 5(1) subs clause 1. Here we go again. The board shall consist of 30 members who shall be appointed by the minister by instrument in writing. Oh my good Lord. Then you go to 3. The minister may appoint the executive chairman as a member of the board. Then you turn the page and you see that the minister at 5 shall appoint the executive chairman as chairman of the board. For true? For true? For true? I encourage the government to pay attention to drafting. The reality is when we sit down in here and we pass, or y'all pass, badly drafted legislation, when it is time to apply it, it cannot be applied. It has to go back to the drawing board, and so things are in abeyance. I say again, help me to understand, Mr. President, how you are saying that the person shall be a member of the board, but may be appointed by the minister, but shall be appointed as chairman of the board. So if you're chairman, you're not a member of the board, help me to understand. And in the midst of this though, you know there is a clause that says that no employee can be a member of the board. I'm just saying. It does say so. They fix it by putting the clause except the executive chairman. Subject to subparagraph 3, members of staff of the hospital shall not be appointed as members of the board. The minister may appoint the executive chairman as a member of the board. Fix y'all drafting though. And I say again, what is the executive chairman? What is the person? Who is the person's boss? Who is appraising? Who is oversight? Senator Adams, you talked about that. And you also talked about peer review of the board is critical. Who peer reviewing the executive chairman? Who's overseeing her? Is the minister going to be getting into the realm of employer? That would be improper. Can't happen. So, here we go. I'm going to share something with the Senate because that's what I do and that's what I'm expected to do. The Central Bank of Barbados, I would say, and I'm made to understand, is one of the best run organizations we have in the country, as it should be. They manage our money. Good. In the Central Bank of Barbados Act, Chapter 323C of the Laws of Barbados, at Section 11, it says, and that is under Part 4, Administration. The governor shall be a person of recognized experience in financial matters and shall be appointed by the minister by instrument in writing for a period not exceeding 5 years and should be eligible for reappointment. He shall be appointed on such terms and conditions as may be settled in his instrument of appointment, and such terms and conditions may not be altered to his disadvantage during his tenure of office. It is this type of thing that should have been done for the executive chairman. I'm not in any way suggesting that the executive chairman is in the same realm as the governor of a central bank. But the legislation is clear as to what to do with the governor, what the governor is supposed to do, what the governor can and cannot do. He has protection. You know what you're doing with a governor. You do not know what you're doing with this executive chairman because the person is being appointed by a minister with the approval of the cabinet, but the person is an employee of the hospital. It's a massive confusion. No, that is true. It may be deliberate, but at the end of the day, it's in the public domain. And as was said in the budget, that is referred to as stay the course. In the first section, it says, true transparency is not just about publishing data, but making sure people understand it. I do not understand the executive chairman. And I am Dumpsy. Dumpsy is a word, right?
Yes, please. You said every day.
I am Dumpsy.
It's understood.
Mr. President, I can say Mr. Clark, I can say Dumpsy. I say it already though, on the record. It goes on to say here in this document, it is also the art of communication, not just the use of big words, that was a nice little dig there, and high-sounding phrases. I am simply seeking clarity with regard to the drafting of this important piece of legislation. And all the focus on the designate has taken away from the importance of the bill. Do we need an executive chairman? Do we need a chief operating officer? Do we need a director of clinical and diagnostic services for the effective and efficient running of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital? What we need is legislation that makes sense. What we need is people who will stay the course. What we need is clarity. What we need is to stop the bad drafting of legislation if it has to come into this Senate where Monique Cité sits. It is an insult, I find, that we continue to get badly drafted legislation. It's an insult, Mr. President. And what makes it of greater concern to me is that the other place has more lawyers in it than up here. So what is going on? I did not come in here and make up the shalls and the mays. They're here in the legislation. Tell me what is the executive chairman's qualification, what are the qualifications required? Tell me what the person, who's the employer. Tell me who the person is supposed to respond to. What is the executive chairman, if we are to accept what Senator Adams said, which is that we need this and we need to do this at the hospital. Tell me who running things at the hospital at the end of the day. It is simply a question of drafting properly. That's what it is. So draft properly. Because we, in the profession, or anyone who has to apply this legislation, cannot be guessing. And it is irrelevant if the person is eminently qualified for the position, because we are not here with legislation relating to somebody's qualifications. We are here to deal with the posts of executive chairman, chief operating officer, and director of clinical and diagnostic services. Do it the right way the first time, because this government does not get back to legislation that needs fixing. I had a leak, Mr. President. My bill is coming at $642. The leak was under the house. The people had to use the Hilti and go through the walkway. I still don't have anybody to go and say please for relief because I don't qualify under the legislation. We talked about that since July last year, or if not the year in front. How long we here?
Last year.
But I don't know, Mr. President, there's no provision for it. We were supposed to come back and do an amendment. So I'm done with this thing, but we can amend because it is so badly drafted. When it is time to vote, I have to say no. It doesn't matter if I believe in principle or agree in principle that we need an executive chairman. Because of how this is drafted, I have to say no. Now, it is hoped that the government senators, because they only need a simple majority for this legislation, will stop saying yes to badly drafted legislation. Send it back, fix it, bring it back, let me say yes. Stop saying yes because y'all are supposed to say yes. You're helping bad legislation to come into existence. And then we still have to come back and fix it because at some point, there's going to be an issue with the executive chairman. The person has no protection, the person is neither fish or fowl. Fix the legislation, stop rushing the legislation, and stop insulting the senators that have to come and deal with this type of badly drafted legislation, or bring the people from CPC or whoever is doing the drafting to come and sit with us so that we can also understand what is to happen with this legislation, Mr. President. I've been saying this since I started as a senator. And Mr. President, I'm going to continue to say it. I am not here to rubber stamp foolishness. I am not here to agree to nonsense. And I am insisting and demanding that they do better in terms of the bills that are coming to this honorable chamber. It is ridiculous, it is insulting, it is offensive, and it makes us look, like I said before, like a banana republic. And as you say, sir, it's embarrassing. And if it is that drafting properly is a problem, go and announce the person, we are putting an executive chairman and it shall be so and so. Because you have the numbers, nobody can stop you. Plain and simple. Nobody can stop you. You haven't done interviews. You're not going to do interviews. So the transparency issue has been poo-pooed. If you're not going to draft properly, announce who you're going to put in position and go along. But don't send badly drafted bills in this house for Monique Tate to deal with. I'm going to get it, I'm going to pull them apart, and I'm going to tell you you're wrong. Send it back and fix it. I am obliged to you, Mr. President.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. No.
You know what you're doing.
Mr. President, I raised this afternoon to support this bill as it relates to the amendment of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Now, this bill, at least on paper, is quite straightforward. What this bill seeks to do is to amend the current management structure of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital by removing the CEO and replacing it with an executive chairman, chief operations officer, and also adding the other post of director of clinical and diagnostic services. Now, that's all this bill essentially seeks to do. Amend the current leadership and management structure of the QEH. But at our last sitting, and as well as today's sitting, we would have heard some senators use their opportunity to express their feelings as it relates to their displeasure for the straightforward amendment. I heard phrases like lack of transparency and lack of accountability being thrown out into the atmosphere. Now, while those phrases might reflect their personal views, and it is their right to do such, I have a duty to ensure that that information is put into context. Because my fear is the public might well be unintentionally misled to believe that those phrases are statements of fact, when in fact, that is just simple expression of feeling, opinion. That is how some persons may feel, but don't for 1 second let us take this as a factual statement. Now, the objectives of this bill, before I even get into the objectives, let me first start by saying that the Queen Elizabeth Hospital should never be used as a political football or a political pawn. We can't, and I agree with Senator Tate when she made the comment, that it's not about personalities. It is about the piece of paper. It is about the piece of paper before us and what it intends to do. Now, the million-dollar question is, why are those changes needed? To answer that question, we first must identify the problems that are plaguing the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And only after we go through this exercise will we then be able to, one, identify the source of the problems, and be better able to understand why this particular piece of bill has been brought before this honorable chamber. Now, Senator Walker, in his presentation on the last occasion we had our sitting, provided a thorough explanation about the history of the QEH and expounded on a number of the critical issues that it currently faces. And I expect that Senator Haynes will also provide some further detail as it relates to the operations and inner workings of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and the issues that they're currently facing. So my job today, not being from that medical cloth, is to approach it from a layman's perspective and be succinct with the points. Get straight to the point with the issues at hand. So the problems that the QEH has been facing for a long period of time include, and it is not limited to these things. There has been a constant mismanagement of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital's funds. There has been continuous occasions where there has been no stock or limited stock at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. There has been bad procurement practices. There has been inundated long waits for basic surgeries like hernias and for cataract. There have even been long waits in the accident and emergency. Accident and emergency, you sit and you wait for an emergency. There's been low staff morale and there's been an increasing number of staff absenteeism. There's been poor working conditions throughout the entire QEH, and the staffs are dissatisfied with the conditions in which they're working. There's been a poor disaster preparedness protocol set in place, and there's been a lack of proactive management at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Now, those are just some of the issues. As I said, I won't go into an exhaustive list. But what we can discern from those problems is that we have a common denominator. Those problems have a common denominator, and that is a lack of leadership and a lack of proactive management. The QEH, as it currently stands, has excellent hard-working staff, from the technical staff to the administrative staff to the general workers. All of them are excellent, hard, able-bodied persons within the QEH. But the reality is if the head is bad, the body will also be bad. We cannot expect the body to function if there is no proper systems in place within the head. So we need to address the core issue, which is the head of the institution, the management. It is only so much that staff can do and achieve in the absence or lack of proper management. So if we can agree that that is an irrefutable fact, and I want to state it again, it is only so much that the staff can do and achieve in the absence of proper management and clear leadership. If we agree and can accept that that is an irrefutable fact, it is quite easy to understand and appreciate the true objectives of this amendment to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Bill, because it directly addresses the management issue. As it stands at the QEH, the current management model is that there is a board which is responsible for setting policy and the general oversight of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. There is a CEO, and there are other executive directors who are also responsible for the implementation of the policies of the board, as well as managing the day-to-day operations of their respective portfolios. Now, the problems that I've mentioned earlier have clearly exposed the inherent weaknesses in the executive management of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, because if there is no stock or we are running low on stock, whoever's responsible for making the decisions in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital would recognize that this is an important aspect as it relates to the delivery of goods, delivery of health services, that they should put systems in place to ensure that these type of continuous stockouts do not occur. But stockouts has been a continued situation within the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I can't blame the working staff. I have to look at the person who's responsible for them. That is the management. So issues like that identify the inherent weaknesses in the management setup of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Now, they don't like to hear the term the lost decade. Well, at least the opposition senators don't like to hear the lost decade. But a fact is a fact. Over the last 10 years, the last administration and its board were unable to wrestle the systemic issues that were plaguing the QEH. This government now, after winning the general election, put systems in place, appointed a new board, and from day one, in the last 18 months, that board has been taking step by step, stride by stride, addressing issue after issue to try to arrest and change the course of the current QEH as it relates to the issues that it's been facing. Now, the post of Chief Operations Officer This government examined the situation and recognized that that was a needed post, the Chief Operations Officer. And why is that? Because the Chief Operations Officer will be responsible for the overall management of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And within the bill, it also highlighted further duties that he will have. And that list includes maintaining the external accreditations, ensuring the effective planning and implementation of the capital works projects, ensuring that there is a current plan for disaster management, and maintain the effective information and technology and cybersecurity infrastructure. Those are some of the duties that the Chief Operations Officer will have. The next post, which is the Director of Clinical and Diagnostic Services. As it currently stands, is only the Director of Medical Services, which is basically the heart and soul of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. That person is responsible for the delivery of health services. Now, the new post, that being the Clinical and Diagnostic Services, the Director of Clinical and Diagnostic Services, while that may merge with the Director of Medical Services, the intent here is for that person to relieve some of the stress off of that existing director, so that this new post will now be created to deal specifically with the improvement of productivity and efficiency in the overall delivery of services of health services. And the final post, which is the elephant in the room, the issue of the executive chairman. Now, before I speak on this post, one of the senators in this honorable chamber suggested that the executive chairman of the board is likely, one of the senators in this honorable chamber had indicated that the existing chairman of the board is likely to become the person to fulfill the role of executive chairman. Now, in that same breath, they indicated, and that's really the atmospheric noise came into play, about this lack of accountability and the lack of transparency. So before I address this atmospheric noise, I want to examine her stewardship. I want to examine the stewardship of the board over the last 18 months that she would have been sitting as the chairman. In the last 18 months, the board of the QEH would have activated the hospital's internal audit. What this means is that they would have engaged a number of auditors to do forensic examinations as it relates to the financial management of the QEH, so that they can see where the mismanagement has occurred and therefore be able to hold persons accountable for the financial issues of the QEH. The board has also begun costing the services of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, because as it currently stands, the lump subvention that the QEH currently receives is not necessarily based on the actual output of services that they provide. So we have a lump sum of money that comes into the QEH, which might very well not be able to deal with the actual cost of running the QEH. So what this board has done, has started the costing program so that we can find out what every cent for each equipment, for each good, and each service amounts to, so that we can have a better understanding of the total cost, total operational cost of running the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. The board has also initiated a stock-taking exercise at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and to date they've discovered, let me quote the figure here. To date they've discovered that there is approximately a $30 million variance between the stock that is currently at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and what is reported in the financial reports of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. $30 million is the amount of money in stock that is unaccounted for in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. That is what this board has discovered. This board has also engaged a company which specializes in inventory management solutions to restructure and improve the way in which we manage our inventory. They've identified some security measures such as barcoding and other security features to help minimize the loss of stock and the misplacing of stock within the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. The board has also removed itself from its involvement within human resources issues. Now that is an important aspect that should be highlighted with this board, because naturally persons would suggest that If the board is involved in human relations matters, there might be some sense of political interference in the determination or outcome of the situation. So now the board is no longer involved in that manner. That is strictly an HR matter. And finally, this board has expanded the minor case unit within the hospital. It has repaired the staffing. It has repaired the changing room, repaired the respiratory unit within the general workers area, as well as repaired the nurses' lounge. So there are a number of things that this board has been doing over the last 18 months to ensure that some of the issues that the QH has been experiencing has been addressed and rectified. And I just named a few. This is only a few of the many issues that the QH is currently plagued with. Now, with that in mind, when the post of executive chairman was suggested, and when it was suggested that there would be a merger between the CEO and the executive chairman, the atmospheric noise began. Lack of accountability, lack of transparency. But I want this honorable chamber to know that the concept of an executive chairman is not new to corporate governance. This is not fly-by-night position. It was not just created to suit this particular. It was not just a post that was created for this particular bill. This is something that was in existence prior to this bill. A research paper undertaken suggested that 75% of the French companies have a single person occupying the CEO and chairman roles within their corporate structures. And 60% of the American companies have a single person holding the position of CEO and executive chairman. So it is not new. But most importantly, in 2004, the National Association of Corporate Directors explored the issue of merging the CEO with the executive chairman. And in that report, titled The Report of the NACD Blue Ribbon Commission on Board Leadership, it determined that each institution or organization is different, and the board should determine which leadership structure is most appropriate to their situation when they examine how that system of leadership should be enacted. This government has done the work. This government has assessed the situation. We've looked at the history of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. We've looked at the current management situation and how beneficial it was over a period of time. And we've come to the decision, bearing in mind all of the issues that have occurred in the past, that the best way to deal with the leadership and management structure of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital is to make these three proposed positions available to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and its executive directors. Now, once this bill is passed with your support, what we will now be able to see within the Queen Elizabeth Hospital is an executive chairman who has established clear lines of command throughout the entire hospital. It creates a bridge between the board and the executive management structure of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, so as to create an environment for swift decision making, so that instances of the past where a CEO might be absent for work for 5 or 6 months, things can be done within the Queen Elizabeth Hospital because we have an executive chairman who is always present and prepared to function between the board and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. It creates fluidity within the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. It removes layers of bureaucracy within the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. That is what an executive chairman can do for this institution. So in layman terms, taking out all that fancy jargon, the executive chairman will act as an extended arm of the board, who can now maneuver throughout the whole entire body of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and implement the initiatives and policies of the board more efficiently and proactively. So when stock is running low, you don't have to wait till a board meeting. The executive chairman, who already would have had that directive from the board, would now be in a position to make a decision because it has already been sanctioned by the board. He doesn't have to wait, as it was the situation in the previous management structure of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Now, again, I want to go back to the atmospheric noise, accountability and transparency. Now, when I look at the bill indicates that under clause 2, that the board is going to delegate such functions as it thinks fit and expedient for the purpose of effectively transacting the business of the board to the executive chairman. So the first thing that we need to identify is that the board delegates that power to the executive chairman. Now, the executive chairman does not operate in isolation. So the executive chairman does not sit in the board and makes decisions on its own. This bill suggests that the board there are 13 members within the board. Correct me if I'm wrong. The board shall consist of 13 members. 13 members will be in this board. One individual may sign off, but 13 people have to collectively make decisions as it relates to policy and initiatives within the boardroom. That is then taken by the executive chairman and implemented within the institution. That is implemented within the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Now, in terms of checks and balances, the executive chairman, based on this bill, is at clause 9A, subsection 2, is responsible to the board for the execution of its policy and the management of its affairs. So what that means is that this executive chairman, is responsible to 13 people, 12 people first. Responsible means that any decision that is taken or done by the executive chairman, he has to be responsible to the board as it relates to the policy and the management of the QH affairs. That is what clause 9A2 of this bill states. Now, that's the first check. The executive chairman has been appointed. We recognize from the bill that the executive chairman is responsible to the board. Now, the issue about what happens if we want to remove the executive chairman. The bill also makes provisions for that. The minister is responsible for the removal of the executive chairman. He appoints the person, he can remove the person. The bill states that. So there is accountability. If the executive chairman is responsible, anything the executive chairman done is a reflection of the board. And anything that the board does is a reflection of the minister. And anything that the minister does is a reflection of cabinet. We can keep going down the line. But there's consistent checks and balances within this bill, which indicates that at any point in time, if this executive chairman needs to be removed, it can be done. Enough checks and balances to ensure that this executive chairman reports to the minister, but is also responsible to the board. That is what this bill has. So in relation to that atmospheric noise about lack of transparency and lack of accountability, I believe that this bill has adequately dealt with that. And at most, all it could amount to is hypothetical and artificial arguments. Now, Mr. President, I believe I would have touched on most of the points I wanted to address in this bill. I've highlighted the issues. Mr. President, I believe I have identified most of the issues I wanted to address in relation to this bill. I've identified the issues that are plaguing the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I've identified the steps that have been taken by the board over the last 18 months to rectify some of those issues. I've indicated I've linked the issues that are plaguing the QEH as it relates to the management deficit. And I've also elaborated on the posts that have been proposed for this bill. So, Mr. President, I am in full support of this bill and its intended objectives. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Senator Crystal Hay.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity for me to speak on the QEH amendment. Barbados is a country, one of the countries that has committed itself to the provision of universal health care for its citizens. And it's a lofty but very, very noble goal because it has an influence on the life or death of our citizens, on their financial survival or their financial detriment. For the last 55 years, QEH has been the only tertiary care hospital on the island, providing a range of services from preventative medicine to palliative care. But in my observation as a doctor who had spent about 10 years of my life working in the institution, it has become abundantly clear that it wasn't business as usual then, and it is not business as usual now. The term business as usual is something that I actually picked up in a statement by the then president of the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners. The statement is from July 2014. It was an appeal. It said, short-term financial injections have failed to rectify the serious situation at the QEH. BAMP therefore appeals for restoration of adequate levels of funding to prevent harm to patients. As a junior doctor at the time and as a public servant at the time.
May I inquire from what are you quoting?
Oh, that's from a Nation News article. Nation News article, July 2014. But I wanted to, I wanted to reference that particular statement based by the bargaining agent that acts on behalf of doctors, just to give an idea of what the last 10 years was like operating under not just the Democratic Labour Party administration, but under the management structure that had been in place at the time. At the time, obviously, as a public servant, there are certain rules that govern how we can engage with the media. We're not allowed to speak out on certain things. But I have a distinct recollection at the time where a former Minister of Health on the sidelines of a Nursing Week activity, around the same time BAMP released a statement, said that he wasn't aware of any issues at all at the QEH. But in my capacity as a Registrar 1 at the time, I knew that we had run down to a 2-day supply of anesthetic gas. The concern at the time was that with 2 days supply of anesthetic gas, you couldn't possibly consider doing any surgery electively on anyone. So for a prolonged period of time, you might recall that you were hearing emergencies only, because God forbid there was a mass casualty situation. We wouldn't have been able to put people under to perform the required surgery. To further impress on you how dire things were at that time, you heard the rumors, but there were more than rumors, about gloves, not having alcohol, fundamental things, Panadols, adrenaline for neonatal resuscitation. If your baby was born flat, God help you. Those were the times that I worked in at the QEH. It was not a joke. And the QEH reached that point for a number of reasons. Funding was one of the reasons that we've heard repeatedly. So the first indication of funding challenges, to my recollection, was made public around 2012, where the then CEO had indicated that the QEH required about $200 million in order to function in the way that it should, but there was a $46 million budget shortfall. That was 2012. By 2013, the following year, the then minister came out to announce a further $35 million in budget cuts to the QEH. In that same year, the announcement was made of a further $3 million in cuts to the pharmaceutical supplies. So chronic underfunding was an issue, to the tune of $500 million cumulatively over the last decade. And it had a very, very, very real impact. I can speak to my perspective as a Registrar 1 in the I department at the time. We had a 9-month period, 9 months, where surgery came to a standstill almost completely. You would not believe the predicament that it put not just patients in, but doctors, because a number of ethical dilemmas arose. And I will share an example with you. At the time, once again, we didn't have lenses, we didn't have balanced salt solution, we didn't have basic drapes for surgery for 9 months. So I have a clear recollection. You had one consultant at the time, God bless him, said, you know what, these are public patients. The government of Barbados has committed to universal access to health care, free at the point of delivery. And this honorable surgeon pulled his pocket, purchased supplies, and his list continued uninterrupted. Another surgeon made the decision, you guys not giving me tools to work with. So I am driving a stroke, and he did no work on public patients for 9 months, exclusively did private work for 9 months. A third situation that I recall distinctly during that time was that another consultant saw an opportunity. He encouraged the junior staff to provide the patients with a letter where they can present to his office to buy the required supplies at a markup. And just to show you, it wasn't just a situation where patients were deprived of the required surgery with very, very real impacts on their quality of life and on their lives very well overall, but it also presented ethical dilemmas for healthcare providers. That is the QEH that I worked in, under the management and under the structure that it had until I left in 2016. Earlier, one of my Senate colleagues spoke very passionately, and I agree with a lot of what he said. But my Senate colleague, as a senior consultant, and also as a person who was a head of department for 11 years until earlier this year when he resigned from that posting, sat on something called the Medical Staff Committee, which is the highest decision-making body for clinicians in the QEH, and they report directly to the board. I'm just curious to know what his thoughts were about the operations of the QEH during the time that I was there as a junior doctor. I love my job. My patients love me. I showed up early, I left late. I mean, leaving that place was one of the hardest decisions I ever made, but I had to go. Could not deal with it anymore. It was rough. And I commend the staff who show up every day and commit their lives to the service of the Barbadian public. When we took office in 2018, we had a situation where the debts to suppliers that had resulted in the consequent disruption of supply and the consequent disruption of service, the debt to suppliers had accumulated to some $200 million. The same board that certain people are trying to land base have overseen that debt come from $200 million to some $15 million in 18 months. So when we speak about the QEH not having the financial challenges at the moment, but that the challenges currently are related to management, we are not kidding. We have seen an evolving crisis of management in the QEH. Departures of prominent figures, including the procurement officer. Many, many questions swirling about how he performed and what he did. I won't raise it here. Irregularities related to the financial management and lack of oversight of the institution. One thing that I recall very, very clearly back in 2013 was an accounts clerk managing to get away with something like $500,000 in forged checks. Where was the oversight from the Director of Finance, who, when called to question more recently, submitted a resignation? And further, speaking to the crisis of management, you guys will be well aware that when called to account during the estimates process earlier this year, we had a CEO that showed up for one day, never showed up again, and submitted his sick papers for 6 months. So how is a board that is the decision-making body of the institution supposed to see policy implementation when there has been near complete collapse of the senior management structure? Next to impossible to implement anything. So when we hear about stockouts because of somebody doing stock take, I don't take that. I do not accept that. Could it be that after the procurement manager resigned, that there were challenges subsequent to that member of the management team leaving? The situation that presently attains at the QEH has prompted the executive of this country to make a decision that there's urgent need for the situation to be rectified. And the Prime Minister has determined that the best approach to this structure is to have the structure of the board change to allow for the creation of the post of executive chairman as one of 3 posts. And I want you guys to consider this. Traditionally, a CEO, they have the day-to-day operational responsibilities. But when it comes to decision-making capability, they do not have that purview. Most of the time, you have a board that may meet once a month. You have a space that is as dynamic as the QEH, with a board meeting once a month, and a CEO whose hands are tied because they're in a position where they can't make critical decisions and have to wait for a board to meet. I am very, very glad that Senator Adams took the time to point out that in terms of corporate governance, everything has to be contextualized. There may be a gold standard or an ideal, but the hospital is literally operating in crisis mode. And there's an urgent need to see these situations rectified because lives are on the line. It has been said that we should not make this about the person, but to a certain extent, I still believe that it has to be addressed because not so much in this space, but in the public space, in the media and so on, in the call-in programs, you're hearing so much talk about nepotism and all these things, making mincemeat of the woman. I have a relative who was a member of staff, and she recalls this individual 20 years ago working as a health planner in the QEH long before she was married. We need to look at her based on her merits and not her marital status. And I don't believe that she should be disqualified from the position because of her proximity to anybody she happens to be married to. End of story. She has an LLB with honors. She has a master's in health policy, health planning, health finance with distinction from a top UK university. And she currently works for a multilateral organization that oversees health planning and health policy in 12 islands. So people making an issue about what's she gonna get, what's her compensation gonna be, she getting the same thing as who was there before? This is a demotion for this individual, I would have you know. This is a demotion for this individual. But it is all about service and for love of country. I want to take the time to address a few things. The emergency department is one of the departments that repeatedly pops up in the press and can largely be seen as a barometer of the state of affairs in the wider institution. One of the chronic things you hear about is lack of bed space, overcrowding, staffing shortages, and so on. And one of the things that the Prime Minister actually decided to do, recognizing the challenges that she faced, was to prioritize seeing some kind of resolution to the issues in A&E, and that is why that money was allocated. The reason that has been provided for why the A&E expansion project has not been completed has been that they had conducted a study and found out that the subsoil is not appropriate for construction, and now they have to resort to Plan B, which may be to actually move A&E upstairs into the above floor. These things take time, okay? But in the meantime, the Minister of Health, in his wisdom, has seen it appropriate to seek to do other things, including making sure that there's a second triage system, including the implementation of a short stay unit and a minor cases unit, where if you're coming in to get a cast done or something like that, it wouldn't contribute to the crowding downstairs. And further to that, the opening of the 24-hour polyclinics has seen a throughput of about 3,500 patients a month, no doubt contributing to the alleviation of the backlog that we're seeing in the accident and emergency department. To my previous point, A&E acts as a barometer for the rest of the institution. So the things that are happening on the floors above impact ultimately what we see in the accident and emergency department. One of the critical issues in the QEH is the lack of bed management and the lack of proper discharge planning. We have a bed occupancy rate of about 7.5 days based on the last CMO's report. Basically, what the CMO indicated in the last available report is that you have patients that are no longer acutely ill, sitting on a bed, waiting for ultrasound, waiting for CT scan, 2-3 days. And we have to keep in mind that these beds come at a cost of approximately $850 per day, because this is a tertiary care hospital with the resources and the level of staffing that comes with a much more significant cost. One of the other issues that has resulted in the lack of bed space is the issue of what we call elderly for cares. Situations where people in the community, for whatever reason, are finding challenges looking after their elderly loved ones and more or less are leaving them to be cared for by the state. But the challenge there, once again, there's an economic cost to it. A tertiary care bed is costing taxpayers $25,000 a month. A bed at geriatric is costing $5,500, and a bed at an alternative care facility like a nursing home is $2,700 a month. So you literally are paying 10 times the cost of putting the person in a home to keep them on a bed at the QEH, a bed that some person who's coming in from a car accident or something could be on. Many of you might not be aware, but the designate has been a bed manager during her time in the United Kingdom. So we have to consider the range of expertise that the person who previously, because of the role of chairman, where you can't get involved in the operational aspects, the day-to-day operational aspects of the running of the hospital, but has all these skills, was trying to make suggestions, but guess what? For 6 months, no CEO. For 8 months, no procurement manager. For 2 months, no director of finance. All of the greatest ideas and policy plans in the world without somebody there to implement them.
Mr. President.
On a point of order, so I know if to sit.
What do you raise, sir?
On a point of order. The QH, Mr. President, from the day that the CEO went on leave, had an acting CEO. To say to the public that is without leadership is totally incorrect.
Not sure that's the point of order, but please proceed.
Yes. So as I was saying, there are challenges related to bed management, to discharge management, that have consequent effects downstream on what we see manifest in terms of the overcrowding of the emergency department. Another issue that comes up repeatedly is that of surgical backlog. Patients having to wait months, if not years, to get surgery. When we look at the hospital, it's easy, I guess, at this point to look at senior management. But we, as the providers, have a responsibility to the public to do what is in their best interest. I will refer at this point to the Code of Conduct of the Barbados Medical Council, which indicates in section 3.91 that practitioners employed in the public service must be clear that their private interests do not conflict with their responsibilities in the public service. A conflict of interest can arise when a practitioner has an economic interest which conflicts with their public service obligations. One of the things that I hope to see resolution of is an issue where surgical waiting lists for public patients have continued to mushroom. And the elephant in the room has to do with an approach that senior medical staff have taken where priorities elsewhere may conflict with the duty that they have to the public. It would be curious to see what an audit of surgical operating lists would reveal in terms of the weighting of public versus private work. I am hopeful that within the next few years, this is something that we can see resolution brought to, but I will leave that where it is. One of the issues that this government also has been tackling frontally has been an issue related to a shortage of nursing staff. I was heartened to see recently that the Minister of Health has overseen the appointment of 90 nurses who were previously temporary, including nurses at the psychiatric hospital, many who for 8, 9, 10 years were not appointed. So giving them that vote of confidence that previously was not there. But further to that, understanding that there are certain specialist areas, particularly in terms of nurses, nursing care, ICU nurses, cardiac care nurses, and so on, seeing the opportunity to engage, not just at a regional level, but at an international level, to seek help. And I understand that there was a very robust response to the advertising that went out to encourage Ghanaian nurses to apply for postings here in Barbados. Some, as I understand, close to about 700 nurses had applied online. 150 were shortlisted, and 120 are likely to be buttressing our nursing complement. I had the opportunity to speak at a pinning ceremony for nursing graduates just a couple of weeks ago at the Barbados Community College. And it was heartening to see the optimism that these young nurses had. I hope that with the additional staff, that they can not only get exposure to the clinical skills and so on that they may not have been exposed to before, because you have international expertise now coming into Barbados, so they would be able to be exposed to a different level of, a different way of doing things, hopefully, that they can learn from. But on top of that, I believe that one of the issues in terms of the nursing students not performing at the level that we would have wanted them to when it came to the regional examination is that when you have nursing students on a ward, you have nurses that are stretched to the max. Where does the time to teach come? So it doesn't only have direct influence on the relief of already overworked and burnt out staff, but it may actually have ripple-on effects in terms of the teaching that nursing students are exposed to. I can't stand here without speaking to junior doctors, as I was one for a number of years. The government of Barbados invests about $249 million on an annual basis, making sure that $249,000, per medical student during the time that they're training, during the 5-year time that they're training. But we've had a situation for some time, where in spite of completing that training, many junior doctors came home from Jamaica, from Trinidad, or perhaps even the ones who were still here, to find that there were no posts. But guess what? If you don't complete internship, you can't even look to register to open a clinic or to try to create an opportunity for yourself. So imagine your country having made that investment in you. You sacrifice time away from your family has invested money as well. And after 5 years, sorry, there's no room in the inn. So there's been a long-standing wage freeze, a long-standing hiring freeze. And just as there are shortages of nurses, we also need to rationalize our medical staff complement. I can tell you in my time, I worked in a department that had 12 consultants, each with their respective clinics, each with patients to prepare for surgery, each with a dedicated operating day, each with a set of post-op patients to see, by 4 junior doctors. 12 consultants to 4 junior doctors. The junior doctors are the ones who are in the hospital day in and day out. They're the ones working 30 hours every 3 days. They're the ones that interface with patients day to day. I think that we need to look not only at because the current situation very well may be that. I've heard that all the posts for junior doctors are filled. Considering that there has been a hiring freeze for the longest time, and considering that based on the economic situation that has prevailed, more and more people are accessing care in the public sector, we really need to look in a rational way at what our needs are in terms of staffing. Saying all the junior doctor posts are filled doesn't tell me that we actually are adequately staffed when we consider patient ratios and so on, in terms of what the country needs right now. In 1964, when the hospital opened, Barbados had a population size that was about 70,000 less than it is now. Since 1964, when the hospital opened, the rate of admission has more than doubled, from 11,000 annually to 25,000 admissions annually. Since the hospital opened in 1964, we have gone from a lifespan of about 61 years to 75.9 years. So more and more you get people approaching the facility for care. How is the structure of the institution evolving to keep pace with the needs? And based on what we're seeing, the resources, human and otherwise, are being outstripped by the demands of the public. So these are things that decisions need to be made on. Lastly, I cannot stand here as a champion for the Heart and Stroke Foundation and not speak to wellness. Every day, Barbadians make choices about their health. When you have the drink with the added sugar, when you have the sauce, I will say it again, when you have the pie, you're making decisions about your health. We're at a place where right now in Barbados, 8 out of 10 deaths are related to a non-communicable disease. The burdens as it relates to the need for dialysis, the amputation rate, the stroke rate, the heart attack rate, all related to choices that we as citizens are making day to day. And I want to use this platform to make a public appeal to Barbadians to just start by being more conscious of what you're putting into your body. And I'm not saying to quit cold turkey. Christmas is coming. I hope to indulge in some ham or maybe a little pie. But we really have to be more conscious as a people about what we're doing. You know? As Lead Pipe said, not all the time so, just sometimes. Not all the time so. All right? So I know it's past our usual lunchtime. I won't belabor the point. But this bill has my full support. And I look forward to seeing the change and the results that the designate, the highly qualified designate, will bring to the institution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this sitting be suspended for 1 hour until 3:15.
The question is that this session be now suspended until 3:15. Honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it, and we are on lunch break until 3:15.